Let's open with a word of prayer. Our dear loving God, we thank you for your presence with us. We thank you for your guiding hand over our lives up to this point. We thank you that you are the creator of this world and the universe, and that you are looking lovingly at this planet and longing perhaps for this controversy to end more than we want it to. We pray that you would help us to be part of the solution to that problem, and that you would give us insight and understanding about our own characters and yours in the process. We thank you now for your Holy Spirit guiding and teaching us. In Jesus' name, amen. So we started, for those who haven't seen the first two parts or been involved in that discussion or can't remember what we did, we started looking at quotes from a book called Hunger Strike by Susie Orbach, who is a psychologist and counsellor. And although the book primarily is about anorexia, which is a condition that mostly affects women, but is infecting increasingly men as well, it's a mental disorder. You could say it is a mental disorder, and it's quite hard to treat. In fact, it's one of the most challenging ones to treat. And they say that when people do get rid of it or survive it, they're never completely over it, so it's still quite a battle. Maybe it's because it involves food, maybe it's because it's a complex psychological condition that people don't really know what causes it. So it's sometimes people seem to get it if their parents have had it, but then it's very random. So it seems also cultivated in society. So there's, because of connected to body image and patriarchy, and this is what she picks up in the book, that this patriarchal gender roles have created a situation where women tend to be more affected by it because they are traditionally the caregiver and the food provider, and this actually, and the role of women in society being submissive to men and having to get their identity through a man, often having to rely on men, or being taught to rely on men and not to be independent and self-sufficient. And we looked a little bit at that, how boys and girls are raised differently. So boys are raised to be strong and climb trees and take risks, and women are raised to be careful, don't get dirty, don't get hurt. And that is built into the culture often, so that girls are raised to depend on people, to look up to others for their validation, not to be so self-confident, not to be so self-assured or directed in what they want to do. And that creates a problem. They're also not really to express their needs because they're supposed to be supporting everyone else emotionally. They're the caregiver. So that means there's this internal conflict that when they want to do something different, they don't want to be a wife or mother. They want to, that it's not so easy to express those things and to get their needs met, which drives them inward. And sometimes food is a comfort. Sometimes it's a way of fighting back. There's this interesting dynamic with food. Maybe it's because the one thing in their life they can control, they can have a say over, because often they don't have a voice. And there's this complex relationship with foods that drives them. On the other side of that, or coupled with that, is this body image concept that women are valued through how they look. So there's huge pressure to be thin and not to eat. And that means there's an imbalanced relationship with food. But I guess two of the reasons I was looking at it, one is because it's showing that connection between patriarchy and people's lifestyles and how they form habits to cope with that, how we often form damaging habits to cope with that, and self-regulating mechanisms, and how it can lead to mental problems and anxiety, depression. And there's so many mental health issues in society now that I think it was the second reason to look at it was how to tackle that and how to get to know ourselves. So one of the quotes we started with was famous, well, I don't know if people had heard of it before. I assume they had. I had heard of it before. Ellen White quote from First Testimonies, which I just wanted to put in the chat. Just a one-liner. So it says, in order to be fitted for translation, the people of God must know themselves. So whether you know the context of this quote or not, I want to know what people think when they hear that. How do you understand what she's saying now? How do you apply it to yourself personally? And I don't know if anyone has any ideas. What does that mean to you? So I know we should understand the context to understand how she meant it, but we can look at that in a minute. If you know, you might know what the context she's talking about when she says that. But what do you think it means in order to be, why does she say that? In order to be fitted for translation, or what does it mean to you when you hear it? The people of God must know themselves.
That's good.
Hi, Emma.
Hi, Ignatius.
I think it means that it's pointing to understanding the nature of humanity, knowing who you are, our makeup, really.
Do you remember if you knew that quote before the Nature of Humanity studies? Is that how you would have seen it? How did you see it before the Nature of Humanity studies?
Before those studies,
Might be hard to remember.
when I came across the quotation, I came across it during the studies of the nature of humanity. That's when
Okay, so no problem.
Came across it.
Free understanding. Bless
Yeah.
you. See if anyone else got any thoughts. And it's not really a right or wrong answer at this point. Well, it's not right or wrong anyway, really. It's your personal perspective on it. Blessing, you've got, or Charity, I don't know. Assume Blessing.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, when you read that quote, the thing that came into my mind is emotional intelligence. Partly because I guess I've been reading on emotional intelligence recently,
Right.
and it identifies that, the most important thing in emotional intelligence is self-awareness, because it helps you to navigate through your emotions and to make success of different aspects of life, whether it's things you want to pursue, relationships that you manage, etc. So I read a book recently that talked about how people with intellectual capabilities but are poor in emotional intelligence tend to fizzle out faster in terms of, the potential of things they could have been able to do, whether it's because they burn out or they get involved in scandals that, ruin their careers for life, etc. They don't have good relationships, they're broken relationships. But people that might have quote unquote average intellectual capabilities, but have mastered the skill of managing their own emotions and the emotions of others, have been seen to have more success in life. So there were experiments done, observations made over years, etc. But anyway, point being, when I read that quote now about the importance of knowing yourself, for me, what that speaks about is self-awareness in an emotional intelligence context, because I think it covers everything. The habits that we form are indicative of our emotional state many times. So yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Very interesting. So you're connecting, obviously, people's habits and their character, their behavior to their emotional intelligence, and it's intimately connected. So the way they feel about things directs how they act, and if they control their feelings, then they can often act in perhaps a bad way or a self-destructive way, perhaps we could say, even if it's not morally bad. And that's connected probably to coping mechanisms and being able to face the stress of whatever they are. So you talked about people with high intellects who perhaps in very high-powered jobs or challenging intellectually positions, but if they can't manage the emotion, that derails them. So I suppose they're found putting their affection in the wrong place or trying to manage anger, different things, which can wreck their lives. So that's one aspect, I think, of, obviously that's a huge aspect of knowing ourselves, because from what you've just said, it could dictate your whole life, how you feel emotionally. Natalie, put your hand up.
I just wanted to add to that's how great kingdoms and empires fall. It's all about emotions, pride, or making wrong decisions, not knowing thyself and others and other nations.
Yeah. And the classic example, Alexander the Great not being able to control his alcoholic habit, and that's destroyed his life, destroyed his whole career. But yes, interesting point. It affects the whole, and pride and selfish ambition and thinking. I guess there's a drive behind that for happiness, that people think these things are going to make them happy, or they're driven to grasp and gain and get. And interesting. Anybody else got any thoughts about what that meant for them before or after being in this?
Yeah, could I just ask him what blessing the book that he's reading, if he can just put that in the chat, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I think for me, a couple of things. I looked this morning where it was, and I thought that was the case, but it's in a passage called The Health Reform from First Testimonies. This is part of her early works, First Testimonies, and she's talking about knowing the connection between the mind and the body. And of course, the context is denying depraved appetite. And she also talks about overworking and how these affect the character, and how you can't have a depraved appetite and go into heaven, basically. But I think it's very interesting that she doesn't just say good Seventh-day Adventists must know themselves. She says to be fitted for translation. So this is specifically for us at the end of the world. And the applications, even the comment Ignatius made definitely about the nature of humanity. It's very interesting how we have had an increase of knowledge on how the humanity works. So this is not just, so how I read it before was very much, we must know our weaknesses. We must know that we've got depraved appetite and control it. We must have victory over appetite and must know my own sins and my own weaknesses and what I'm addicted to, or what my behavioral patterns if I get an anger problem. So for me, I saw it very personally as we must know our weaknesses, basically. I'll put it in there, as opposed to they must know themselves. They must know their weaknesses and overcome them. So that was the pressure, I think, for me reading that quote. But then as I re-looked at it, I thought, yes, it's the fact that we've had this. It's not just the mind-body connection, it's the complexity of humanity that this is talking about, that the people of God as a group, it's not so much an individual application, it's a group application, that we must understand humanity. And we've had such an increase of knowledge on that, in the sense of that it's not just about the power of the will, it's the fast and slow brain, it's the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. It's much more complex and nuanced than we at first thought. And understanding that gives us hope in our own experience, but also helps us to extend empathy to others. And I think that's crucial in this knowledge. So whilst we're finishing this, I guess, presentation, I think I want to make a wider application of it than just anorexia, obviously, because anorexia is just one way that people have found to cope with life, I guess you could say, or the challenges of life. That's developed out of a need that's not being met. And many things that people do are often ways to cope with stress or difficult situations or underlying emotions that they can't even explain, or that they don't even recognize. And so, go on, Natalie, so you've got a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add before you move on about, you were talking about individual, and then I can't remember the word you said, but I think you're meaning that it's what you're applying, all the quotes and stuff in the subject can be applied, like I said about the rise and fall of nations, it can be applied to how the institutions should be run. Without emotional intelligence and without knowing how an institution should be run, it will fail.
Yeah, and as a body, how to know ourselves as a group of human beings, yeah, and nations. And that applies at the family level, I suppose, the church level, all the institutions, the governments and the nations, that the principles to follow to have success, really about understanding yourself and understanding why you do what you do. So we had finished on this slide, which started to talk about how body insecurity comes about. So it started to describe how women feel about their bodies and how that affects their mood on an hourly and daily basis. So she did research that showed that women think about how they look more than once or twice a day, and it's a huge stress because it's connected to your value. So the last part, a woman's identity is deeply entwined with a sense of herself as an attractive person and with a body which she negotiates the world. So the body is seen as something almost like something separate. It's a weapon. It's something negative often for a lot of women, maybe even men as well. I know some men spoke last time that even for men there's a pressure to be muscular, to be thin, to be, it's becoming much more with social media pressure of men as well. But before it was much more women. The objectification, making the woman's body an object with which she can beguile men, get what she wants. The more pretty, the more young, the more attractive, the more successful. And that's still perhaps the case in most of the world, in fact. So this is a huge pressure because there's a huge, I guess, stress on women then to have a certain body type, body shape, in order to get anywhere. So your skills and talents are not looked at with the same value as men's. If you're good at a job, for instance, it's not looked on the same as it is with a man. So if anyone's got any comments or questions, just stop me, but we'll try and move on a bit. Go on, Cedric.
Sorry, I missed the beginning of your talk. And so could you just kind of briefly...
So this is part 3 of these slides. So we've done part 1 and 2 before. I think this part 2 was August, and that's how long it's been since we did one. So there was meant to be a 1 program, but it's kind of going because we keep discussing things, which is good. I think it's making it relevant. And so we're just trying to finish the program. And I just gave the setting that it's, we started with that quote from Ellen White about the people of God to be fitted for translation. They need to know themselves. And then we started to look at quotes from this book about anorexia. But even though it's about anorexia, I think the issues it raises are very poignant and important for us as a movement, because she highlights that patriarchy and female gender roles are often the root cause of a huge cause of anorexia. Obviously, there's individual things as well, and it's quite a complex mental disorder. So, but we're looking at it now, hopefully moving into what do we do about that? How do they tackle getting well from it and healing from it? And I think those principles can be applied to most things that we're struggling with in our own experience. So each of us have things perhaps we struggle with, maybe addictive behaviors, maybe anger problems, negativity, mental health issues, depression. There's lots of things that we all get tempted in, or we have different weaknesses, different character traits that we have to fight against, or we feel we want to fight against. And how do we do that? So that's what we're moving into now.
Yeah, but what if you going through a lot of mental anguish, which does, I think, become a problem, and you get in physically hurt by what you're going through? How does that pan out?
Hopefully this might help. I don't know. Let's move through this and see if this answers some of it, because obviously everyone's experience is individual and everyone has different mental and physical challenges. But I think all of them, our mindset affects. We know the mind-body connection is very strong. So obviously, if the mind's depressed, the body can get sick, and the other way around. There's such an intimate connection. So they're both often down together. And it's how to help each other with that. If anyone's got any thoughts or ideas about that as we go along as well, to share, to encourage each other that there are things we can do, or ways of thinking that can help. I think, depending on how severe the condition is, obviously. And whether it's there are physiological things wrong. So some mental health disorders require medication, or at least are benefited by medication. So there is a place for, I think, medication. So, and it's not enough to say to somebody, obviously to people that are depressed, we'll just snap out of it and think positively. So I know we can have a very, you can solve everything, but I don't think you can solve everything. But there are things you can do to ease things and to make it better.
Yeah, but I think the mental health doctors and everything, they need to listen to what the patient is saying, because they don't. They just automatically, if you talk to them, they automatically put you into a category. And that's not the case. It's because they have been taught that way, and they just put you into a box.
I think each of us have experienced that, where the institutions of the world, this isn't links back to what Natalie said, I think, about nations, and that institutions are affected by a way of thinking, by a way of behaving. Often they're money orientated, often they're patriarchal, so they don't give, women don't have a voice. There's layers of discrimination, layers of damage. I think we can see that the institutions of the world are groaning under a weight of sin, so that people are not paid attention to, people are not listened to, people aren't given time. All those things are a product of the society that we're in, which is money driven, money focused, perhaps time driven. We try to fit a lot in a day, and doctors are under pressure to meet targets, and just like schools are. I mean, all these institutions, it's that the balance between functioning and I guess economically, which perhaps you can't do with education and health. I mean, we can get into debate about that, but and people skills, managing individuals. So we have laws that govern a nation, but those laws have to be applied on an individual level, often with a court case, for example. So and it's how much time and energy you put into that. So yeah, there's a hugely complex, I suppose. The way that people are handled that depends on the doctor you get. Your whole experience at school depends on the teacher you get, depends on the friends you're with. There's so many factors to how someone is raised and how they see things. And I think that's what I suppose this is addressing as well. So it says self-help. The first step is the process of recognition, the acceptance that one has a problem. Such a recognition makes it possible for the individual to begin to face the facts of their situation on their own and to explore the possibilities and services available to her or him. And this is hugely true, I think, of a lot of mental health conditions. There's a stigma in admitting that there is a problem and that there might be something that I need to do to correct the issue, that I have actually got a serious problem. And often especially with anorexia, there's a denial there that there is an issue, that I'm actually fine. And the way they see their bodies distorted, they still think they're fat, and it's and they're obviously very underweight. So there's but especially with mental health with men, I think more so than women, there's a stigma in admitting that there's any issues there because you're not allowed to show any weakness. And even with women, there's a shame. There was a shame. I think in this century, we've done better. We're doing better, that we're recognizing mental health is a real serious thing, and that you can be signed off sick from work, for instance, with mental health issues, or but it's still slow progress.
I had a friend, Emma, that I used to work with. I'm still friends with her, and she's a lot younger than me. We used to sort of really get on together. We still do in a way, even though she's about 18 years younger than me. She had a problem with her figure and keeping slim. And I found out by accident really that she kept eating and then she kept buying these laxatives.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to keep buying them so much that she actually got banned from going to a particular shop because I think they realized what she was doing. And so it wasn't until I don't know, I was walking with her in Birmingham once, and she said, "Oh, Debbie, could you buy me just?" And I just didn't even think about it. She was, "Oh, I'm just going to go over here. Do you mind buying me a box of laxatives?" I just bought it. I thought laxatives, so I just did it. You just don't think of it. And it wasn't until afterwards that I realised that there was something wrong with her. And down the road, to cut a long story short, down the road now, and lots of years after that, she was looking back. Because I told her, I said, but I just happened to just ask her, I said, why were you doing that? And she said, because I was really bothered about my figure. I was really, so it's the body image, just like you said. And she said, and obviously now she's older in age, like 20 years older now. And she said that she couldn't understand why she was doing it. She's back eating again now, cooking for herself again, because she hasn't married. And she's back eating it again. But she said she didn't know what pushed her to do it. And I don't, for me, I think it's a worldliness thing, but I think it's just fitting into society, I think. But it's a weird way to do it, isn't it? When you think about it.
It's purging. So that's one method that they can use to get rid of the food that they've eaten. Others make themselves sick and vomit. Yeah, often anorexics will vomit. Bulimics who eat too much will vomit too to get it back out, or use laxatives to purge. It's called purging, so that you get rid of the food. But there's more. I mean, on her case, she said she thought she was conscious of her body image. It starts with that often, but or it morphs into that. But there's usually deep-seated emotional issues. So there's a need there to be listened to be recognized, to be loved, to be accepted. There's a fear of growing up. They've shown lots of different reasons why they move into that with the food thing. It's about control. We'll touch a bit more on that, but it's an addictive behavior to manage and cope with life. So other people, boys, will often turn to drugs or vaping, or self-harm is hugely popular. Common now, that people will get something sharp and cut their wrists. And in the pain of doing that is actually not as bad as the emotional pain. So they get some emotional relief from cutting. And I find it amazing that people will do that not knowing or have heard of anyone else doing it. And lots of people are doing it or doing it from very young. They might scratch themselves, bang their heads. These are reactions to trauma often. And then that can develop into anorexia. So that it's not just about their conscious, how they look. They're also, perhaps there's a fear of becoming a woman. They don't want to be sexual, don't want to have responsibility, get married, have children. All that's unconscious often. So there's a resistance to growing up, and you want to look like a girl. You don't want to look like a woman. So you want to stay thin and not develop. And it's seen as something heroic not to get a period, because of course, if you get too underweight, the body shuts down and says it's not got enough nutrients to even have a monthly cycle. So they'll stop the period. And girls will go for years without a period on being anorexic. And this is seen as a sign of, when they go into these institutions to try and heal the anorexia, they're all competing with each other, who can be the thinnest and who can stay not having a period. And once the period comes, they're mourning, literally, once they start putting on weight, because they're forced to in these institutions. I don't think they do it quite like that anymore, but they would force feed them, and you'd be punished if you didn't eat. And once the periods come back, they're literally mourning, crying and depressed about it, because it's a sign that they're becoming a woman. They don't want to. So that's fear of perhaps growing up and sexual things. And, there's so much to it. And that's why it's hugely difficult to sort it out. It's very sad. I mean, to the point where they would be counting calories constantly, obviously, and trying to see that they don't want to put any calories in there, even washing food off their hands in case it goes through their skin, down to fighting over licking an envelope. They don't want to lick the envelope because there's calories in the gum of the envelope. That's how obsessive the mind gets about not doing these things or the behaviors connected to it. But I don't want to get too much, I guess, into the anorexia, but it's fascinating to listen to people's stories about it, though, because you see what's going on through their minds when they're in the situation, as they reflect back on what they were like. But the way they tackled it in them. So Susie, yes.
I had my hand up before Debbie spoke. How are we going about the rules here?
Oh yes, I was going to ask you, but you put it down, and I thought, she hasn't kept it.
I haven't put it down. It's still there.
Go on. Okay. Oh, it disappeared off my screen. Sorry. Carry on.
Shall I speak now?
Yes. I saw your hand, and then Debbie started speaking, and I thought I'll ask you straight after she does. Go on.
I just wanted to know, so I can follow, with the quote with Ellen White, what's the context in that? Because I've been looking for it, I can't find it. Can you just tell me what the context is quickly?
Yes, it's in one.
I know where it is. What's the context?
To me, the context was the understanding the importance of health reform at the time of Ellen White. That people.
That's the context to that chapter, is it?
Sick, yeah. And she says, look, you can't be sick.
Okay. Thank you. I don't need any more information. And my second point was just to add to your thing, that I work with people who slash themselves and anorexia in mental health hospitals. And a lot of time voices tell them to do it. And unless they do it, the voice won't stop. It's another point. It's not just about how they look.
So it's driven by, well, we would say in the past that's Satan's angels, we would say it's satanic, whole thing. But obviously that's another mental health condition, hearing voices, and schizophrenia is similar, where they hear voices. So yeah, there's multiple reasons why they might self-harm, and anorexia is a form of self-harm, really. Coping mechanism that's developed, which obviously is negative. So what they'll do in these institutions, Susie Orbach worked for years in a anorexic clinic to help people with anorexia. Personal history subjects to be discussed could include a sharing of the deemed commencing of the problem. So trying to trace them back to see where this started, one's own and others' awareness of the beginning of it, attitudes of friends and or family members to anorexia, to the issue. And that can perpetuate it. So if people make comments about how thin you are or how fat you are, or that can actually obviously exacerbate, make it worse, the situation. So if you haven't got a supportive environment where you are, it compounds the problem. But a lot of the time, these are supportive families, and the parents are at their wits' end to know how to help the person, because whatever you say is wrong. And when certainly if anyone's ever read a testimony or a book about it, you can feel the frustration, and you're almost siding with the parents, because there's nothing they can do that helps this person, because the person has to eventually choose for themselves. What a typical day is like currently in regard to eating and non-eating. So how they think about food through the day. They wake up first thing and they're thinking, I'm not going to eat, and they're already planning they're only just going to eat half an apple or whatever, or they're not going to eat at all. The course of the anorexia, including the various attempts each person may have made to try and get over, through, or around it. Discussion of various treatments one has experienced, helpful and unhelpful professional interventions. So, and these things are things we can go over ourselves about. If there's a behavior we don't like, or a character trait, we can look back in our own lives, and it's helpful sometimes to trace, well, what was my experience like growing up? What traumas did I have? What my parents' attitude towards me? What were my siblings' attitude towards me and towards obviously with this the condition, but your relationship with food, your relationship with school, and things that happen to you which have formed character, basically. And then looking back at that to see how you can change it, or is there a way of changing it, and resetting faulty thinking. So topics that might follow from this are the role of food in the family and eating patterns of family members. So how other people in the family behave is interesting, and how your parents behaved, how your mother behaved if she was the provider of the food, how you felt about food, how family meal times were. So people in stressful environments who've had trauma growing up can have a very problematic relationship with food because food meal times were stressful. Feelings about food and eating, obviously that's connected. How you've seen food, how you've seen adverts on television for food, how certain icons in your life growing up, everybody has memories of certain things, books they've read, news they've seen, that's impacted them, and you can remember, and you think, what was it about that thing that I remember it for? Why do I remember that bit? And often, obviously, we remember negative things. Even the positive things, if your happy memories are around food, you might have a more balanced approach to it, that food is a good thing. It's always been encouraged as a happy time, Christmas, for instance, or birthdays, or yeah. So there's routines and rituals, the daily or hourly obligations one set. So with an anorexic, they form patterns and rituals and routines to cope with the situation. So like getting up at a certain time and doing a certain amount of exercise. So exercise becomes obsessive because you've got to burn off the calories that you've eaten. So they'll be obsessively doing sit-ups, or approaching the food in a certain way, or even like Debbie, the example you gave about taking the laxatives and getting other people to help with that. So these routines, you'll eat and then you'll take a laxative. So they'll develop situations to, I guess, to manage the situation, manage the disease. Fatigue and sleeplessness, of course, they get very tired because they're underweight and don't have energy. Physical symptoms in general. So how bad is that with the person? How do you feel about your life? Are you tired? What's going on for you? Why is your life going the way it is? Or why are you feeling this about a certain situation? Control and lack of control. And this is a huge one. What control means, what being in control or out of control feels like, what areas in one's life, if any, are free of the need to be controlled, what areas feel out of control or chaotic. So most of us have a level of order and routine in our lives, and most people don't cope when that routine gets changed or goes out of sync. So however much that routine is dictated to you by your job or by your school, by the structure of life generally, there's things that you have learned to do to manage your day. So you'll get up, have a walk perhaps, or do some exercise, or have breakfast, do your teeth, get ready for work. And you're in control of those situations. But often, obviously, as children, parents are often in control and will dictate what the child does, obviously from early on, or train. You could say dictate, but it's a form of control. I'm not saying it necessarily in a negative way, but as you children get older, especially when they hit their teens, they're obviously learning how to be more autonomous and how to take control for themselves. And then they learn behavior patterns, or their hormones are all over the place. So it's a very sensitive, vulnerable time where if they feel at all traumatized, treated badly, they don't like the way they're being controlled, they start to kick against it. And one of the ways is to take control of something themselves. So this is what they have to relate to anorexia. The person getting the anorexia will say, I'm not eating that, and it's my decision, and you can't make me. And that's an assertion of control, which means that this is something now that you actually can't control in my life. And so sometimes there's negative control, obviously, with parents, there's negative control with teachers, siblings, whatever, and we're kicking against that. So it's worth recognizing for ourselves, how controlling are we? Because this came up too with relationships with husbands and wives, couples. What's the who likes to be in control and who's in control of what. And when that control is given to the other person or taken away for some reason, how difficult that is to cope with, because you're so used to being in control of that situation. And it's knowing whether that is actually being controlling of someone else, or whether it's just you managing and ordering your life in a positive way. That we like structure, we like order. If we say we're going to meet at a certain time, we're going to meet at a certain time, etc., because that's how we manage our day-to-day activities. We plan and execute. But when that's out of control, or someone's got a negative relationship with control, turning to food or turning to any addiction is a way of coping with the other areas which they're not able to control or feel damaged by. And that links to emotional regulation. So if you recognize that, for instance, negative emotions are driving you to eat. So people eat because they're depressed, because they're bored, because they're or do addictive behaviors because some other need is not being met in their lives. And I think this is part of knowing yourself, that what drives you, what makes you behave the way you do, and understanding how others are often behaving a certain way because they've got damage, and being sympathetic or empathic to that. Brian, you've got your hand up.
Hi, Debbie. Oh, sorry, Emma. Hi,
Hi.
Debbie as well. Might as well.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. The article we reading from, is this specifically dealing with anorexia?
Yes, this book, she's specifically addressing anorexia. It's called Hunger.
Okay.
So that's why it's geared towards that. But I think some of these principles are helpful for a lot of conditions, not just anorexia, because part of anorexia is a coping mechanism for damaged emotions and damaged some kind of need that's not being met in the person, that they feel, or there's a control element, so they feel like they need to take charge and do something to address it. And it's not just about being thin. In fact, it's not really, it's about being sick, because they recognize often that they're not thin, they're actually sick, and they want to stay sick because of the attention that they get for that sickness. So there's a need to have attention, be accepted, be special. Yeah.
The first page that we read from, am I correct in saying, was it addressed as Western culture?
This one, no. I think probably, yes, throughout Western history, from art and mythology.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I was just thinking, okay, this sounds very Western. Because
would you say it's not a problem or are you contrasting that with Africa?
I don't think so. Maybe I could be wrong, but
no.
I haven't come across people who have, maybe in a very limited way, but not as it is in Western society.
No, it does seem to be. I mean, obviously she's working in London, the one that wrote the book, and it is a UK and America, and it's perhaps an affluent thing that you can, available that it becomes an issue. Whereas in countries where you're perhaps more scraping and got the option.
And why I asked, is it just limited to, well, not limited, is it about anorexia? Because other issues also could be dealt with, I'm sure you just said so, under the same pretext.
Exactly. Because, I think that's why I saw it was valuable, because I recognize that obviously I don't know how many people in this group would be affected by anorexia. We might know one person, or we might have known someone. So it's useful in that sense to minister to other people. But I think for me, the key was the fact that it's related to patriarchy and gender roles, and seeing that effect on people, how damaging it is. But also, as you say, it's across the board that a lot of these behaviors are coping mechanisms for emotional damage and emotional need, which is not being met. And I think if we recognize that, we can help ourselves, but we can also be empathic to others. So I think that's why it's important to understand that it's, for instance, like I think we said this last time, if you see someone who's fat, we can automatically make judgments about that, or super skinny, whatever they look like, we can make judgments, and we have no idea what's brought that person to this point today, and what they've struggled with, what they're emotionally struggled with, what their physical makeup, their genetics, that they've seen now that people who are obese actually have genetics towards obesity. So there's some things that they just can't do. to get the weight that other people can. It's similar to, I think, developing muscle. They've seen that black athletes have more lean muscle mass than white ones. And so it's easier to get more muscular, more strong, perhaps, for some people than others. I'm not saying everybody, but there's obviously generalizations. And yeah. And Titus has written in the chat it exists today. I'm assuming he means it exists in Africa, anorexia. I think it's probably everywhere, but I think it's closely linked to addiction. So they're addicted to this behavior because it gives them attention, it gives them control, it's a way of coping with emotion. And that's often the root cause of addiction. So it's not about the thing itself. So people might have sugar cravings. Obviously, the body can crave those things as well once it starts having it, like alcohol. But it's not that they really want the alcohol. They want something that alcohol makes them feel, that it's numbing the pain. It's helping them mentally.
And I was going to say, with my friend now, she's only 45, and because she hasn't been eating properly and taking any notice of what I've been telling her, she just goes on and eats whatever she wants, and it hasn't been something that's good for her body. She used to just eat chocolate and things like that, and not hardly eat anything. And because she's done that over the years, obviously it's made her feel all right. She didn't feel the effects of it at first, and so forth and so forth. But it's only now that it's actually caught up with her. She's been feeling a lot of pain in her back, a lower back, and she went to the doctors, and she was wondering why she felt this shooting pain all the time in the coccyx. It's like the lower part of the back there, and the doctor told her she had arthritis of the spine, and she's 45, and she's got arthritis of the spine.
It's very sad, yeah, and that's what we eat affects us. We know that it builds muscle, it builds bone, it builds everything, and it builds mental health too. So a lot of sugar and a lot of fat, or food that we know is not healthy for us, just damages the cells, including the mind. So it can cause depression. It is hugely sad, really, that people think they're getting away with it because there isn't immediate effect. And anorexia, one of the huge things with that is obviously they're nutrient deficient, so nothing grows properly, so their bones are distorted, they're brittle bones, they don't have strength. They have long-term physical health problems often, because the body is so damaged in the growth years, in the teenage years when you're growing, and the periods is a problem, perhaps infertility. Lots of things are affected because they haven't had the nutrients in those years, and it's quite sad. It's very sad, but at least it's positive if they can recover. And often they don't recover or they take their lives. But yeah. And Natalie says, vegan raw chocolate makes me happy. Do what makes you happy. Obviously you don't just live on vegan raw chocolate, but
makes me happier, and I don't just live on it now.
Happier, no. And I think if you did, you wouldn't be as happy. So it's all about balance. And I think a lot of that is it's that mental approach to it, and trying to reset when it's negative. So, and one of the things that happens in anorexia often is secrecy, which is what I think all of us do when we think we're doing something that's bad, that's shameful or guilt-ridden. And there's a lot of guilt and shame attached to food, I think, especially for women, especially if they've done lots of dieting, and there's a huge stress. So we do things in secret, and this is addressed with the anorexia. The need for secrecy exists before the onset of anorexia. So did you eat in secret even before that? Is there a felt need to hide one's emotions? It's often connected to, I can't express my emotion about this thing. I can't get angry as a woman, for instance, or I can't, you came from a family who didn't express emotions or didn't demonstrate emotions, and you're a very demonstrative person.
I think that's where you've got to decide for yourself whether you're eating emotionally. Are your emotions regulated? Are you wanting something because an emotion, you're not regulating your emotion, can't deal with something, or are you just having it because you like it and your emotions are regulated? So yeah, emotional intelligence and regulation is very important.
Absolutely, because that links to, I suppose, what Blessing was saying about it derailing your whole life if your emotions are not regulated. So like you say, it's recognizing, why do I want to eat more of this thing, or why do I want to eat this thing? If we're talking about food as an example, why do I want to drink this alcohol? Why do I want to? It's because I'm feeling depressed. So why am I feeling depressed? Let me go back to the root cause and understand how to deal with that emotion in a different way, and recognize it first. Recognize that I've got a need or I've got a problem, depending on what it is. It's not always a problem, it's just a need. And maybe you can't even solve it, but you've got to try and find ways to manage it and not do that, and recognize actually that's a damaging way of managing it, and challenge them.
You might be depressed because we've got high taxes and we have to pay tithe and we're living depressed in our jobs. It could be so many things that are kind of all coming in at once that are kind of very hard to regulate within your life. You can't just get up and leave and move somewhere better, and even there, when you do that, the grass is never greener. So it's very complex, isn't it? It's not just about trauma today, it's about compounding oppression on human race.
Yes, and like you say, you can't just move somewhere else, because when you do, you're with yourself still. So if you haven't learned to regulate those emotions, you could be in a sunny country. If sun is the issue, I'm sticking to you because it says miserable weather, that it's not going to help, or it's not going to fix it unless you've learned how to regulate those emotions. And that's very difficult. I think sometimes it's just sitting with negative emotion, that it's okay to be sad. But in our society, there's so much pressure to be happy, to be exciting, doing recreational things that are exciting and not just working a mundane job. People have social media posts saying they're doing all these wonderful things. And that's that huge pressure that you must be happy, you must be positive, and depression is a sin. And yet it's accepting that's part of the human condition, that it's okay to be sad about things that are sad. You know, like when you said you might be depressed about taxes, and or you might be depressed because you're in the middle of a war. I mean, there are genuine reasons why we should be sad. It's not a happy moment. And then and recognize there's a lot of suffering in the world that's really relevant, not easy to cope with. So that, I think, is the importance of the next one about relationships and friendships. Titus, you had your hand up.
I went from
Titus just had his hand. Go on, Titus.
Sorry.
Okay. Concerning the point of secrecy, so I was just thinking that really the author is identifying a symptom of a fundamental that has something that is fundamental, which is the impact and influence of the society, our friends, those around us on us. Because if you just consider that one can hit in secret because of fear of what others, those around them, will say or will react. And I think these influences are conscious and subconscious. And I think for me, it has there is a point of emotional intelligence, awareness, and that. But I was like, I think the influence of those around us, like the friends and what the society tells us, especially in regard to dieting, what we should eat, how we should look like. I think it's far more it's far more it's big, and in relation to the example that Debbie gave, you can see the friend. It's now 20 years, and the friend has practiced that for 20 years. And by the time the friend maybe is aware, a lot of time has passed, and those influences have shaped their mind and everything, to the extent that it might be said, of course it should not be said, but it might be said that it is too late. So I think maybe also, especially in relation to that secrecy, it's a symptom of what the influences to get from our friends, from those loved ones, and to withdraw from them is very hard. And even changing the mindset while still living with those influences is a hard task.
Yeah, and that's true as well. So environment is a huge issue. So if you've got somebody who's, let's use the anorexic example, in a family where they're not happy, you can try and treat the symptoms, the disease, but if they're going back into the environment where they're not happy, and this is often a challenge with counselling, that we see a child who's from a very traumatic background and they're going back home to a very unregulated, unstable, violent, not violent, usually you can do something about that, but where the situation is not ideal and you can't change it. And they're going back into that, and you see them 1 hour a week and they're 7 days a week in this situation, and it's very challenging because it really shapes their experience. And when you were saying societal pressures is huge, the way we've been raised culturally to see what's bad and what's good, And then we've got Christianity on top of it. We've got the health message. We said that before, the pressure to behave a certain way and not really making those decisions for ourselves. So this is control as well. So I think something else we can recognize as Christians is we've been dictated to by God for years. And now we're trying to grow up and say, do this because you want to, not because you're going to die and because you think God says you're going to be killed off. And yeah, it's a lot to change. I think that's what's changed with the Midnight Cry message too. Now we're growing up and saying, you know what, let me relax about these things and let me choose for myself, with the health message, for instance, being good advice, what I want to eat, and be relaxed about it and not stressing that I'm going to burn in hell for it. And that's just using the health message as an example, but we can see any issue in that way, that God has given rules and we have to follow them, and we're moving beyond that motivation, I think, which is, I think, is very positive. So Natalie put in the chat, physiological and verbal abuse is violence. Yes.
Sorry,
absolutely.
I put physical, psychological, I meant. Sorry, I put the wrong.
Yeah, psychological and verbal abuse is violence. Yes, and it's often worse than physical. So I totally agree with you. Obviously, where we can prove that someone's really.
I didn't say it was worse. I said it's violence.
No, I'm saying it's often worse than physical. I'm not saying it is, but it is because it's undermined. It's not seen on the same level. You're not got bruises, so you must be okay. But we know that's not true. Cedri and Debbie, you both had your hand up. I think Cedri tried to speak.
Yeah, I was just thinking about ever since I moved to Potter's Bar, which is 4 years ago in March, will be March. I've actually lost a lot of weight, and like I feel like I'm down to about nearly 9 stone now, and I just think it's too thin for me. And but I realize it's what's going on and happening to me, which nobody believes. So and it's happening not only to me, to a couple of my friends, my brother, and about maybe 20 people. And I didn't realize that there's a connection between maybe
Food.
yeah could
The
be
eating response.
and
Yes.
it's one day my brother said to me that he called me and said, wow, you've gone back to being skinny again. And I didn't really think of it in that way, although I do like my food, but I don't know really the connection yet, or yeah.
Yeah, that's very challenging, and it's a very challenging situation. And I think if you're mentally stressed, if you're mentally anxious, depressed, down, it often has an effect. We know it has an effect on the physical body. So often people get either they overeat or they get put off eating altogether. So then they tend not to look after themselves. So they're not cooking, they're not eating. And it's not something conscious necessarily for them. They've decided, I don't want to eat. It's just that they're so wrapped up mentally, they don't even think to eat. So that normal everyday.
Yeah, you don't. I actually didn't feel hungry.
Yeah, and you get put off your food,
No.
so mentally disturbed because the vagus nerve is goes straight from the brain to the stomach. We know the stomach's the second brain, that it's affected hugely digestion by mental health. So there's such a big correlation that if you don't, and then you stop eating, you don't even remember to eat, or you're not eating properly, you're obviously going to lose weight, and it's not conscious, so you don't even recognize it often when you're in the situation. And I think it's a big challenge. And then and as you say, you've lost weight, and I'm sure it's because you're mentally stressed, usually.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is, and then now has to be conscious effort to say, I'm going to sit and eat properly and slowly and focus on the food and try and distract or direct the brain away from the stress, which is all part of a coping mechanism. So one of the things I think is coming up hopefully will help. We can talk about some things we can do to challenge the mind. But obviously, like we were saying about circumstances, if people are in circumstances which are not happy ones, it's very hard to, if they can't change that, to cope with it, to make it better. Debbie, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Emma. I was just going to say something quite different from this. This is about anorexia. But I just wanted to say that I remember looking at a program once on my phone, and it was quite the extreme of this, where people in Africa, it was about these women in Africa, and where they were getting up to puberty and getting older, where they get arranged marriage in Africa some way. And what they would do, they would I think they were from 16 upwards or something like that. They would actually force feed force feed these girls all together. They would sit in this hut, and there was this mother who was keep giving this sort of very rich milk, and it was to actually put on weight. It was thousands of calories. I don't know what was in it, but it was a great big massive jug, and they had to drink it even if they were sick. There was women in there who kept being sick, and after they'd been sick, they'd come back to the camp again, and they'd give them more drink, telling them to drink it. And the reason for that was because they wanted them to be fat and have voluptuous sorts of round bodies to get them ready for husbands. But they went to this particular, these young women did, and it was done by one of the mothers, and they'd have to keep drinking this very, very rich milk or some whatever else they put in it. And sometimes, like I just said, they were absolutely sick. But this was to put weight on, tons of weight on.
So we can see the cultural influences as
definitely,
and different type of abuses, I suppose, as well. But it's I think there still is perhaps a pressure which is connected to hospitality and eating, that women should be voluptuous, as you say, well covered, and that's seen as attractive and seen as positive. That if you're skinny, you're underweight, and they always want to feed you up and give you more food, and it's a very hospitable thing as well in Africa, that people want to feed you all the time. India's the same, and maybe Britain was like that way back. It's not so much now, perhaps. It's just that, so these things also go in phases in fashion. So years ago, I mean, in the Renaissance, you see these pictures of these voluptuous naked women in pictures in art galleries. And it was during that time period, I think Rembrandt, I can't remember, it was 18 or 1700s, but a certain time period where it was seen to be attractive. Women were attractive if they were well covered and had big bottoms and big bust, of course. But now it's in our time, it's gone super skinny. But it's a fashion thing. It's a cultural change. So depending on what time you live, what country you live, the pressures are different. But how that can lead to problems, because you're being forced to do anything. It's just awful. But there's a societal pressure that seems to force us down a route as well. And that shows me the importance of the institutions, going back to the institutional level. If the governments and the institutions are solid, and if social media was solid, and it would promote all body types and sizes and talents, because you've got gifts and talents, not because of what you look like, and it just embraces everyone, then the whole society would be formed differently, and people would react differently, because the majority of people would think this way, which was positive, equality, etc. And so we can see the importance of getting the government and the institution correct at the top. Even to churches, where Ellen White talks about the spirituality of its members will rarely rise above the pastor, because the pastor has influence. So if the leaders have influence that's positive, and they can filter that down, society can be geared to go a certain way. And because we see from the top down it's gone wrong, we see so much damage everywhere. So going back to this, I think linking to what people have been saying, friendships and relationships is connected to the secrecy part. How open can one be with friends? Has the anorexia, the bulimia, or the shame over your body, or whatever secret habits you're doing, brought about social isolation? So what will often happen is people withdraw from friendships because they can't take people saying, you're getting a bit skinny, why aren't you eating? And all that pressure, for instance, with the anorexia. So they will withdraw from people and not tell them the truth. And Debbie, what you were saying about your friend sort of hiding things from you and saying, go and buy me the laxatives, but she's not going to tell you that she's constantly taking them because she's got problems with her body image. So there's that secrecy there that people don't know what's going on. And often that's because of a lack of connection. So, and when you're talking about your friend, I think you've spoken about her before, that there's super isolation and loneliness. She hasn't got a relationship. She's not married. She's in a culture which stressed to get married, and there isn't that relationship. There isn't someone accountable to, you know, she's accountable. She's not coming home every night seeing someone. And we know that relationships and friendships is really what is the key issue in people living long and happy lives. That longevity is directly related to relationships. So if they're feeling that they haven't got good relationships with parents or friends, or this leads to that emotional need that's not being met, and then they try and use other things to fill it. So we talk a lot in counselling or in, you know, mental health about ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And if a child has had, and there's a list of adverse childhood experience, anything from your parents divorcing, domestic violence, mental illness, being treated badly at school, being bullied, sexual and emotional abuse, neglect, so severe things that have happened to children as when they were small, that those things impact their behavior later on. They impact their ability to deal with emotion, their ability to interact in society. It leads to bad behavior at school, rebellion, and violence themselves, becoming perpetrators because of these things that have happened to them, and they haven't had a stable functioning relationships growing up that's taught them how to interact with others and how to behave properly in society. So it's hugely connected to a lot of mental stress, mental illness, because of the damage that's been done. The next thing you might tackle is dependence and independence. How do issues around dependency and autonomy, which again is connected to control, relate to one's life? And how are they expressed in the anorexia? Is there a value judgment attached to these themes? So you're taught that it's good to be independent, it's good to be self-sufficient and do your own thing, and which is good. You know, you're not dependent on those around you necessarily, depending on what the situation is. But again, the anorexia is an expression of some of that I don't want to be to do what my parents tell me. I don't want to be dependent on them. I want to do my own thing. But it leads to negative behavior. And the way you see fat is like horrific. You know, to be fat would be, you'd rather die than be fat. And I'm not saying people who don't have anorexia might feel like that because of the limitations it has in your life. But when we've got extreme fear about anything, I think it perhaps needs to be challenged and addressed. Where does that come from? So this is connected to the last one: body size and body image, fear of fat, distortions, not seeing oneself as others do. So you can tell someone till you're blue in the face, you look fine, you're not fat. But you and I know that if they don't believe that, they believe they're fat, there's nothing you can say that's going to change their mind. So there's something in their mind that has distorted what fat is, or what they see, why they say that they're fat. Would any size be sufficiently thin? What does thinness represent? What does fatness mean? Body size of family members, body size through the years, and where they've got that from. So one of the things that you tackle is that why are we so negative about bodies? Why do we go past the mirror and go, oh, ugly? You know, what's the thoughts when you look in the mirror? What's your processing when you come to food or to come to anything? Why do you think the way you do? And it's really breaking that pattern, which takes effort, to challenge your own thinking patterns and say, okay, why am I thinking like that? Let me change it. Let me say, you're beautiful to yourself. How many people would do that? Because we're so used to putting ourselves down and lifting others up. But one of the things I was reading on another website about counseling people with food disorders, or any disorder, but this happened to be about weight loss, I think, anyway. And they were saying that you need to reset your mind and treat yourself like you would your friend. So, you know, if you say to your friend, you'd encourage them and say, don't you know, you look nice, you're a beautiful person, you know, it doesn't matter whether you've put on a few pounds or not, or however you would do it, but you would encourage the person. But we don't speak to ourselves like that. And it's really important to reprogram your own brain to speak to yourself like that, and to be kind and compassionate, because it just leads to a spiral of negativity and it doesn't solve the problem. So one of the things as well they found was when people started putting on weight, this was another book actually about weight loss, and I actually can't remember where I read this, might be an article, but when people put on weight or lose weight because they're underweight or overweight, whichever one, and they realize that when they get to the different weight, it doesn't actually change anything on how they feel. So one person thought they'd be more, they'd feel happier, basically. They realized they got more attention from men when they were thinner, but it didn't actually make them happier. And they recognized, actually, why was I so fussed about that? Why was I so bothered about it when actually it hasn't really made that much difference to me mentally? And that's the same we do with lots of things. So we'll say, I hate this job. When I retire, I'll be happy. Or when I change my job, or when I move to a different location, or when I get a different partner, or, so we're putting off your whole life because you're thinking, I'm not happy in this moment. So if things changed, I would be happy. But if you can't, and this goes back to regulating emotions, if you can't learn contentment and acceptance in the situation you're in, it's not going to change anything to change the situation. And this is why you see like Hollywood stars with 6 wives, have had 6 wives, they've had one partner in divorce, they've had another partner in divorce, because there's something about themselves that's not happy, that they're not comfortable with the next person, thinking that this person's going to make them happy, and they can't. Any comments, questions? Let's move on. Sexuality. How is sexual desire or experience affected by the anorexia? What feelings does one have about sexual contact, periods, pregnancy? And we've touched on that, about wanting to hit puberty and have a period and get pregnant, which I can totally understand if you've ever been through pregnancy, but or childbirth. But something about this as well is this, I think, it just reminded me about how addictions for men are different. So it's not food for men, but it might be pornography, it might be sexual things. And the secrecy of those things as well, doing that behind the scenes of any addictive behavior that spirals out of control because there's a need to fill a gap, to fill a hole. And this one, there's often fear of sexuality and growing up. Inclusion, exclusion. Do these themes speak to one's experience? Has one felt, or does one feel excluded from peer groups or alienated and misunderstood within the family? What would inclusion or acceptance on one's own terms feel like? So often if you've got a damaged relationship where people have been bullied or nasty to you, or in the family where there's been difficult family relationships, people falling out with each other, not talking, breakdown, and there's a lot of resentment built up, or there's pain and hurt over that. And it's addressing that and finding out, actually, if I had a good relationship with my dad or my mum or whoever it was, how would that change things? What would that look like? How would I feel? What am I expecting? So it's managing expectations as well. But if you feel excluded, you can retreat and go into yourself. And this leads to these behaviors that are done in secret again. So this was from a website by a woman who's an intuitive eating coach and a body image healer, which I thought was interesting. She's promoting intuitive eating, which is something that some other people have developed. I don't know exactly, except that it's about not looking at calories. It's specifically designed to approach people who have constantly dieted over the years and counted calories and done different deprivations, and none of it's worked. And so she says we need to learn how to, she's got these steps of accepting your body. She says, most of my clients come to me feeling like food is either a punishment or a reward for their body, but food can be a relationship, one that includes satisfaction, rhythm, nourishment, and emotional connection. If loving your body feels abstract, start here. Feed it regularly, eat foods that taste good, like Natalie said about the chocolate. Notice how your energy shifts when you stop skipping meals. Choose to respect your body instead of expecting to love the way it looks. And I thought that last point was interesting. So it's about developing a relationship with food that's positive. And often when we raise in Western society, it's like we have treats, we have punishments. You're not allowed to have that if you've been naughty, or we'll give you some sweets if you're good. There's that whole, we use food as part of a disciplinary measure. And I think that's often negative. So it's, if you want some sweets, here's some sweets, obviously within reason. But there's a negative relationship between food and the person, and it's not good. So she's saying to try to change that relationship, just trust your body's instincts. She said, obviously, if you've been used to abusing your body over the years and you've overeaten, that mechanism that tells you to stop is perhaps broken. But learn to listen to your body, eat when you're hungry, but enjoy it, and just relax around the food. And don't look at it in terms of body image. So often people don't like their body and are constantly judging the way it looks. And instead of loving the way it looks, you don't have to, but respect it like you'd respect someone else. You don't have to love the way it looks. And I don't know how you do that. Choose to respect your body instead of expecting to love the way it looks. That's quite challenging, because we all want to be positive, I think, about our body image. And I don't think that happens overnight if it's been negative for many years. But I think it is important to change our attitude towards food if we've got this problematic relationship to it. And yeah, Brian, got your hand up.
Yeah.
I like that part that says you don't have to love your body, but you learn to respect it.
Yeah.
And that's something I've learned very, yeah, because obviously everybody knows my size, and I've tried to reduce, and most of it is belly fat. And you try a whole range of uh, things to do, things to eat, and what not to eat, or starvation diet, this type of diet. And you just end up back where you are. And I've realized that, look, we are not all the same. That's just how life is. Some things affect people differently, and they can never be a one size fit all solution. So, you know, I know I still would like to get rid of my belly fat, but I've also realized that, look, this is the way I am right now, and I'm going to have to learn to live with this and just control what I can. After that, so be it. I know sometimes it may sound a defeatist attitude, but I can't spend my whole life trying to fix something that doesn't want to be fixed. Or if, let's say, I found a solution, and that solution meant that I've got to give up a whole lot of things and a complete change of lifestyle, and I'm not happy. What do I choose? Happiness or this new lifestyle? It's always decisions that we have to make in life. And yeah, so with respect to this, what you just read just now, it's going to have to be a decision one makes, whether they want to live this way or, take a hit on something else. Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on a fundamental part, which is that happiness thing, isn't it? I think it's because we're driven to be happy. I think that's why we're here. We want to improve. We want something better, and yeah, and that's why we're seeking to be with God, to be with heaven. We recognize that it's not all going to be happy necessarily like we thought it was, or we have this kind of idealistic picture of something. And I think there's something around acceptance and contentment. Like I think you've learned to accept your situation, and you're saying that it's actually wasted energy to try and constantly put off your life by thinking one day I'll get like this and I must get like this, and it's not working because it's a constant source of frustration. So there comes a point when you say, well, I have to accept where I'm at today. It may change, it may not change. That's okay. And I think it's really hard to do that. And it's real life. And like you say, we're not all the same, and we're not all born with the same advantage or the same genes or the same mental makeup. It's the challenges are very different, and it's been proven over and over. Two people can do the same things, and one, especially with body fat, will lose weight and the other one won't. And this is something certainly I don't know if people have followed Oprah Winfrey, but this whole the Olympic drug, I think it's Olympic drug. That's I probably not got it right. Ozempic, something. Anyway, these drugs people are taking now for weight loss, which there was a debate on the radio the other day about the problematic long-term effects of that and whether they're going to put on the weight when they stop taking the drug. But she's sworn by it. She's tried for years to lose weight. She's had so many diets, Weight Watchers, so many times. And if anyone's followed her testimony, it's hugely emotionally sad, yeah, that she's had this struggle and the pressure from the media to be thin, obviously being in the limelight as a leading presenter on American TV. And that finally now she's taken this drug and she's lost the weight, and she's just feeling so different in herself, and having not to have that battle anymore about the fight to lose the weight. So that I don't know the latest. This was quite some months back, so I don't know if she's put it back on, if she's still taking it, how she feels about it. But it's made a massive difference to her. And I know someone else, even in the movement, who works in a was working in an obesity clinic in another country, but they said that it's clear that there's a gene of obesity that some people have. They can put them on the diet in the clinic and it's not having the same effect. That there's a predisposition to be overweight. And so I think it's important to understand those things. And this goes back to understanding the body, understanding who we are as humanity, to recognize that not everyone's the same, and to give that liberty and compassion to people who are not like you, who don't see things the way you do, or have the same likes or dislikes, and all those things that make it interesting for us all to live together. But I liked that, choose to respect your body instead of expecting to love the way it looks. So there's so much pressure to love the way we look, or to look a certain way. And if we don't look that way, we're not happy. And it's very sad that we're dictated to in that manner, that there should be a celebration of people's whole characters, who they are, and not just what they look like, which is freeing. And actually reading some of her stuff about this intuitive eating was freeing, because it was like, oh, okay, so just and some of it I'm saying I know already, but just reading it there was just like, okay, maybe we need to look at this again and just address why we feel the way we do about certain things, or what's our connection to them, and why we're so negative about some things. It's important. So one of the techniques that another person brought out, I was listening to a radio podcast about a modern condition now of depression, but it's low-level depression, so it's not diagnosed, but it's kind of just like a numbness to things. So people are working around the clock, they're doing their jobs, but they've got no joy. They've lost that edge. They've lost that zeal for life in that sense. And it's got a name. I can't remember what it's called, but it's modern day depression, not diagnosed, but just like a status quo, not being happy really. And this technique is also used for people with anxiety who have panic attacks. So it's called the 5-4-3-2-1. She uses it in this context about enjoying eating a sandwich. She says the small things in life, it happens to be about food. It wasn't connected to this presentation, but she's saying that people have lost the joy in just the simple things of life. So getting up in the morning, enjoying the sunrise, going to work and seeing the scenery, or eating lunch. They just tend to eat lunch while they're on the computer, or they're on the phone, and they're not even looking at what they're eating, they're just eating. So she says, you need to focus on, the example is eating a sandwich. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And this is a hugely successful technique with anxiety. So if people getting panicked and stressed by a situation, you get them to sit down. Obviously, breathing techniques are also used, but get them to focus on 5 things they can see and really focus on it. So I can see the blue sky, I can see the green grass. In this case, I can see the red tomato in the sandwich, I can see the green lettuce, I can see the brown bread, and literally go through that process. And even just going through that process. So I challenge each of you to try it, because you look at it and you think, that's so simple, it's so boring, I haven't even got the time and energy to try it because I'm too busy, and it's that whole depends how severe your situation is, or how stressed or depressed you are. But this really does work to lower levels of anxiety. So they focus on their environment around them. It helps them to feel safe and secure as well. They look at the room and they see there's a picture on the wall, there's a, whatever it is. 5 things that you can see, then 4 things that you can feel. So I'm feeling the texture of the bread when I'm holding it in my hand, or you might be drinking something as well, or you're feeling the clothes, touch your clothes, feel, have some stress toys, feel those, fidget toys. 4 things that you can feel in the room around you. 3 things that you can hear. So listen carefully to sounds. I can hear someone, a car go past, or a bird singing or something. 2 things that you can smell, and then 1 thing that you can taste. Maybe you can't taste, but you can imagine tasting if you're not eating at that moment. And just that process slows the brain down, and it helps the brain to focus on being present in that moment. And that's where this podcast person was saying that the joy comes in focusing on each moment and in being present in the moment and trusting in that moment. She was actually a Christian, so she brought God into it at one point, but that whole process of doing that physically grounds the person, to brings the anxiety down, helps them to feel safe if they're anxious, but also brings joy back into their life. And she coaches people with this depression. And she said how people started doing this. It's such a simple thing, but it made a difference. They started to enjoy the food again. They started to just see pleasure in the small things in life, which is so important. And Richard says the blue sky helps me a lot. Absolutely. I'm looking out the window and there's blue sky with lots of white fluffy clouds, but that's quite beautiful. And the grass is green and the sun is out, and it makes a huge difference just to appreciate those small things in life. And even when Brian was talking about his body, and I was thinking it's being thankful for what the body can do and not what it can't do. And I think that's, as you get older, I wanted to comment on that as well, actually, when he said it's belly fat and he wants to shift the belly fat. And there's so much evidence that as you hit middle age, midlife crisis, that I think I've spoken about this before with menopause, but with hormones regulate everything. And as they drop and they decline as you get older, your body functions change. So digestion changes, your ability to digest carbohydrates changes. So the body, not only you may have a predisposition to being overweight perhaps, but you also have hormonal changes which affect everything. And this is why men get middle-age spread, and women as well. So often belly fat goes on around the middle and it's very hard to shift. And I don't think there's a comprehension of that as a young person until you hit that time and you start thinking, oh, now I know what they mean. This is actually quite unpredictable. You may be doing the same things, doing the same amount of exercise, eating the same amount, and you're putting on weight. And there has to be a recognition that the body changes are challenging over the years. You know, you go grey, you get wrinkled, you get aches and pains. I think it helps to have the same attitude to aches and pains. So your legs might hurt, you might have headaches, you might get, all sorts of things happen, more tired than normal, or than you used to feel. Everything starts to slow down, and you get pains and aches where you never knew you had pains and aches before, you never had them before. And I think it's that recognition that, okay, I can live with this. It could always be worse. And what I can still do is what I need to focus on. So I can still walk, I can still go in the fresh air, I can still, hold down a job, I've got a job, lots of people don't have a job. So it's that focusing on the pleasures in life and the things you still have to be positive about that I think is helpful to see. And often we can just be going through the motions and not recognizing those things. So as I've already discussed, emotional desire is an extremely fraught and complex area for women. Although paradoxically, the culture has invested women with responsibility for the understanding of and response to the emotional needs of others. So what that says is society has put pressure on women to be caregivers. We've talked about this in the movement, that women are the ones that are supposed to be emotionally supportive and understanding and sympathetic and kind, and they're not supposed to shout and get angry, and or they're not allowed to. And so there's that huge pressure for the woman to be emotionally, I guess, regulated and strong. But women's facility to recognize and meet their own needs is restricted by developmental imperatives that create taboos on a whole range of self-expression. In woman after woman, I have observed a pattern in which needs and initiations are ignored, disparaged, or thwarted in some way. So she saw a pattern, and this is connected to anxiety, anorexia, sorry, but it's a deeper rooted societal problem that women are not, on the one hand, are supposed to be emotional and emotionally strong for others, but they're not allowed to express their feelings on a wide range of things. And when they initiate or express those things, perhaps it's being strong on a viewpoint, being dogmatic, being getting angry, being more vocal about anything, that they're ignored, disparaged, or thwarted in some way. And that's all to do with the inequality in society too, with the men are superior, they know how to lead, women don't know as much, they're not as clever. We addressed this in an earlier slide about a woman having to ask a man to help change a light bulb, that there's that pressure on a woman to defer to the man to do things and to depend on the man to do things. And we love to have it so. We want to depend on the man, and the man wants to be depended on because that's the way society's taught us. So there's this kind of paradox between the woman being emotional, allowed to show emotion, but only certain emotions, and not being able to express themselves and say what they really want or what they really think about something. The resistance to engaging again in so-called, so this again goes back to the anorexia now, and there's a resistance there to engaging in so-called normal eating behavior because it's often subsumed or absorbed by the twin fears of weight gain and going out of control. So there's two fears which become really prominent for an anorexic. So even though it's not necessarily about how they look physically, the obsession has become with being fat, with weight gain. And if they gain weight, they're going to be suicidal or miserable, or it's going to ruin them forever. That kind of fear of weight gain and going out of control. So that fear of being around food, that if they start eating it, is connected to, I might eat loads and get fat. These two fears exemplify the anorexic woman's relationship with her body. The body is experienced as an object that must be controlled, or it will control. So there's something around this not being comfortable with the body. And I think it's in the next slide. So, and this is connected to, I suppose, some of our teaching on the nature of humanity. There is no notion or sense of the body as an integrated aspect of self. Rather, it represents in physical form the internal struggles to control needs and unsatisfactory object relations in an attempt to dress oneself with an acceptable self-image. The body is something one puts on and takes off, not the place in which one lives. In this stance towards the body, the anorectic woman is, as we have already noted, exaggerating the response that all women in this culture come to have towards their bodies. So there's this negative relationship to the body, which we've been speaking about, and that trying to force yourself to love this body or change it so you can love it, and seeing it as a separate entity, as opposed to, as the anorexic woman, something to control or that's going to control you, as opposed to the place in which one lives. And I think that's how we teach it, kind of, this is the house in which we live. We've seen there's a complicated interplay between that body and the whole sensory, the nervous system, the physiology of the body and the mind. We know that's very complex. So it's not separate from us, but we see it often and conceptualize it as something separate because we're not really happy to identify as this is the house where I live, because we're not happy with the way that house looks. And that's quite a deep thing. And I don't know if people see the difference between the two or how they feel about it. Anybody want to comment? Very quiet. So one of the things I was going to say about what Brian said about the body is that there's a frustration or a sense of, or perhaps a resignation. This is what it is, and I can't change it. And with other things, perhaps if we look at a real house, there's certain things about a house you can change, but it's very limited as well. So we can decorate differently, and we could maybe compare that to dressing clothes. We can dress in a certain way to cheer ourselves up or to help us feel better. And it does, clothes have an effect on how you feel. You can paint the house differently, you can move the furniture around, but structurally, that house is what it is. It's got 3 bedrooms, it's got 2 bathrooms, whatever it's got, and it's in a certain location that you cannot move. So it's in town, or it's in a village, whatever it is, with a certain outlook. And so there has to be an acceptance that that's what it is. And this is where I live. And I'm happy to have a house and live in this house. But there are certain things I can't change. It feels like you can change more about a physical house. And of course you can move out of it and go somewhere else. With the body, you can't do that. It's not something you can just put on and take off. So I think it's important to have an acceptance that this is the place where I live and it's okay, it's good. Blessing. Raise your hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There's a podcast I was listening to. It had nothing to do with health and the body, but I think the concept I'm going to speak about is related. It was talking about how democratic governments compared to autocratic ones, and how autocrats tend to have this exaggerated sense of aesthetic or beauty. And they really, carefully craft their public persona and self-image. Whether it's Putin presenting himself as this strong man, bare-chested, riding on an actual bear, or Trump, clenching his fists just after surviving an attempted assassination, and on and on. Historical figures have done the same. And they pointed out something I found interesting, which is that, those that are the protectors of liberal values, and by liberal, I mean openness, like open debate, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, the very values and norms that make societies, modern societies happy and successful. That most of those people tend to ignore aesthetic and beauty. They do not have a conception of beauty. So think of Joe Biden and his administration. They were very good at governing, but they were not good at politics. They were not good at actually selling their vision to the American people. So it was a very closed up administration, and it would be difficult to identify the successes and goodness of a democratic administration. Whereas Trump and his administration are all about spectacle. They will, even if they're lying, they will blow their trumpet about what they have achieved and what they're doing and how good they are. So in that podcast, you then spoke about how it is important to have a healthy conception of beauty. In politics, I guess, is their context, but I think in general as well, because if beauty is seen as something of vanity, something not to be looked at or treasured, a vacuum is created that can be taken up by bad actors, which you see with, administrations like the Trump administration or Putin. So bringing it to this discussion, I feel in society, and particularly in religious contexts, I'm sure it can apply to other contexts, but in religious contexts, there has been some type of negativity towards this concept of beauty and aesthetic, that you shouldn't care about how you look, your appearance, or about what looks good and what doesn't. What should be important is maybe values or principles and doing the right thing. And I agree that, values and principles and doing the right thing is very important. But I guess the problem with ignoring or vilifying the concept of beauty and appearance leaves a gap that's then taken up by extreme elements, and we end up having an unhealthy relationship with beauty and appearance. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. So how do we redress that now? I think that's the question, isn't it? Because it feels like as conservative Christians, there was a definite, anti being beautiful on the outside. It didn't, I mean, obviously we have the balance with there's order and you shouldn't wear clothes with holes in, and Ellen White talks about things like that. So there is neatness and order and pride might be the wrong word, but a concern about appearance, that we should look like Sabbath clothes, for instance, as an example. But there's a place to be smart. That we should be smart, that we should leave a good impression of how we look, because we're physical beings. So how do we now, and then we come to our time where we're saying, we're questioning all those things in the light of patriarchy and body image for women, and we're looking at all that going, what's okay and what's not okay, and what's beautiful and what isn't, because we've all been programmed to see thin, made up women with long, beautiful hair and say, that's what beauty is, and it is beautiful. I suppose we could say it's beautiful human form, but is it?
Yeah, I guess personally, I don't have the answer to that question. I think it is a good question. But just pointing out, the systemic problem we have in our hands. I guess that was mainly what I was trying to point out, that we do have a problem. As religious groups and as society in general, where we don't have a framework for understanding beauty and aesthetic in a healthy way. So what has been done is ignore it altogether, which doesn't help, or the vacuum that's created by ignoring it is taken up by extreme elements, which is also a problem. So if we recognize that, beauty is a part of our universe, it's a part of our nature, the appreciation of it is part of our nature. Ellen White even says Jesus is the love of the beautiful, and we start looking for principles, concepts, and ways to start speaking about it and having a healthy conception of beauty and aesthetic, so that, people can have a healthier relationship to their own bodies, to their appearance, and to other things that are not necessarily related to the body. But I guess since we're talking about the body, primarily in this case, the body.
Yeah. And this comes to mind, but I know, Brian, you've got your hand up. What we were talking about the other day, I think I was on Sabbath, last Sabbath, I think, I don't know, about how we value things. I think it was last Sabbath, but that value is placed on things because of its rarity. So if someone is exceptionally different in their in the way they look, or they're not the norm, then they become something to be sought after. They're beautiful, like models and people that are more exceptional in any way. But we do that with everything. So nature, flowers that are exceptional, that are more rare, or animals that are more rare and more valuable because they're rare. But if we get to heaven and everything is there, and there's an abundance of all different types of flowers, there's an abundance of all different types of animals, gold and silver, there's an abundance of gold. So it ceases to have the value it has here because of the rarity aspect. Then there's something there about normalizing everything, just becoming, I don't know if that would help to see, but I think we need to broaden our views of beauty so that we know that character is more important than outward looks, but all of us secretly are going, yes, but why can't I look like this famous model and be beautiful in my character as well? And then I'd be really beautiful. So there's that kind of lusting after, or what's the word, coveting after someone else's looks, and having the character as well, and then being perfect. And there's also that thing about being perfect. What does that mean? What does it mean to be perfect? And we've conceptualized different ideas about perfection. That I think if we just broaden that and say everybody is beautiful when they have beautiful character, that doesn't matter the body form, what it looks like particularly, or they do the best with what they've got. It's that kind of really believing that, because we're in a society that doesn't believe that, so it's very hard to believe that. Brian, have you forgotten your point now?
Almost. Yeah. I know I read somewhere when I used to read a lot, but Ellen White describing how Adam and Eve were formed when they were first formed.
Yes.
Their body structure, their height, and for me was height. That's the thing that caught me because I don't have height. And I look at that and I say, yeah, well, God obviously liked what he made, what he created in Adam and Eve. And then you look down the ages, and Ellen White says, one day when we in heaven, Adam will see us. I don't know how, but mixed up. But anyway, to see how we have dwarfed throughout the ages. Adam supposedly was this tall, well-structured person. And if you look at people these days, are much shorter and bodies are much more shapeless, if I can use that word. And I say to myself, okay, let's take it down to our times. West Africans are generally tall people. Southern Africa, we're very short. What's going on here? And you look at American basketball players, very tall and very athletic, and you don't see any coming from our parts of the world. And once again, I'm going to put it down to what I said about my body. I say, it's just a thing of life. That's how the genes were passed on in Southern Africa, and that's how people are. There's nothing. It's just diversity once again for me. And yeah, beauty, just to add what you were saying about beauty, it's an acceptance. They say beauty is in the beholder of the eye. Yeah, I truly believe that, because if everybody thought that a tall, slim, dark and handsome person was the ideal, a lot of us wouldn't have a partner. So yeah, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Just accept what's there and you go with it. Otherwise, things like anorexia are a mental health issue. Yes, there are underlying causes for it, but let us keep it in that. Otherwise, if we try to make it as though it is because, just pin it on one thing about being beautiful, I think that's not right.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no, not at all. I think the point is it's hugely complex and it is a mental health disorder, but some of the ways of approaching solving the pattern is to look at these issues in our lives and to reflect on how we've got that position. And even you saying that about Adam and Eve, so automatically you could equate with that quote, Adam and Eve were created taller and more majestic. It's implying that shortness goes with degeneration, that we're short because we're sinful and we've just lost that, we've just degenerated over the years. That's what makes us short. So therefore tall people are better than short people. And you can read that in just that one quote, so that has formed then your image of how good or bad it is to be tall or short. And all those things that input into our experience shape how we see body shape, how we see everything. We've had input that's shaped our views on things, and often incorrectly. And that wasn't the point that was being made, perhaps, or maybe it was the point that was being made, but we've moved to a different point now, and it's not about being degenerate because we're short. It's really important how we process that information. And that's what I was kind of asking, how people even saw the quote at the beginning, what does it mean to know yourself? So for me, the focus had been know your weaknesses and see your sins. And it's a very negative kind of view of that quote. Whereas if we broaden it and say, no, we need to know about humanity, how it works, so we can be empathic and grow ourselves, to learn about ourselves and understand more, to be better functioning human beings, then it's much more positive spin on it. And even what you said about something else you said made me think about height. And I've had the opposite experience. So whatever we don't have, we tend to crave after. So if you've got straight hair, you want curly hair. If you're short, you want to be tall. I grew up tall, and I always felt pretty much awkward by it, because you're taller than people. People think you're older than you are. You're expected to behave a certain way. You can't get clothes. It's not so easy. Your feet are too big. There's a lot of negative stuff to it. And even seeing tall men with short women going, what a waste. I need a tall man because the man has to be taller than the woman. And here they are, these tall men with these short women. So there's all that concept and the pressure there to conform to what society says is the best or good, and not really accepting who you are and being happy with it. And that's often heightened in teenage years, especially, that there's a pressure there to find who they are and what they want. And it's huge. To society now with TikTok and social media, it's even huger, because there's a lot more input that they've got to compare themselves to, whereas before they might just see the man down the road in the village or the other woman down the road in the village, and there's 2 or 3 people at the school or a small school to compare yourself with. But now the world has got so much bigger, there's a lot more to compare yourself negatively to. I think that's the stress. Finally, we've hit the last slide. So this says the body needs to be transformed from being experienced as an object, alienated and despised, to an expression of self. There needs to be an internal sense of well-being. By entering into a dialogue about the meaning of the body, the experience of body alienation, the use of the body as an object, the perfected body as a means to a new persona, and the projections onto the body, those very meanings are examined and understood, and then in turn transformed. So the process is to approach those subjects and look at them. How do you feel if you're fat, thin, short? Explore how you feel in your own body and what your experience has been growing up or in the past towards certain things, your emotions towards it, how you see your body now, how you see your situation now, your relationships now, every area, to reflect on it and say, why do I feel negative about things which could potentially be positive? So it's now moving from seeing those things in a certain way because of childhood experiences, because of things you've read and inputted, to adjusting that and being transformed. Firstly, she's working towards experiencing her body as the place in which she lives. At the same time, she has to find a way of reconciling the body as owned and lived in with the opposing cultural thrust of the female body as an object. So this is the battle of the anorexic specifically, but perhaps a lot of women in our society, that we have to find a way of reconciling, accepting who we are in the face of the culture we're in, which really objectifies the body in a way that's not normal. But as Blessing has said, there's that balance between how do we see beauty and how do we quantify beauty, how do we promote beauty in a positive way without endorsing societal thrusts of the body as an object. So I think that's the end. Anybody got any questions? or any thoughts? Okay.
You
So with
know,
that, go on,
I'm
Stevie.
sorry. You know what you were talking about, the 5 things.
Mhm.
Can you put it in the
The WhatsApp.
on the forum?
Yes, certainly.
Thanks.
Yeah. It's a good coping strategy. And could finish on that note. Richard's put in the chat, beauty is in the character of Christ Jesus and in the character of each one of us, because we're reflecting Christ, hopefully all in the image of God. Let's pray. Our dear loving God, we thank you that you are a God of love and a God of beauty and a God of joy and peace and all these positive things that we experience and see in the world that still exist even after 6,000 years of sin, or over 6,000, approximately 6,000 years of sin. We thank you for bringing each of us to this place today of where we can be in this movement, where we can understand more about you and about ourselves, where we can grow and learn continually. Help us to be transformed more and more into your likeness, to have a closer walk with you and with each other, and to continue to press together as we see the day approach. We look forward to the day we will meet you personally in the flesh, and we know it's very soon. Please help us to continue to walk the walk of faith and to be strong for one another. In Jesus' name, amen.